this is how I'm going to fuel my next cycling race. So for me, that's a road race. But for you, it could also be a road race, or a time trial, or a hill climb. And I'm specifically talking about cycling in this video, but it does offer help. This video could offer help to other endurance sports like running, but I'll get onto that probably at the end. So as you can see, I've got a selection of bottles just to show how much fluid, and I have a bag of sugar and some other products that I recommend. So firstly, for me, my next road race that's coming up on my calendar, and I think I'll use my example, and then you can gauge, and I'll give examples of what you might need for your race. So for me, my next race is going to be about 3 hours probably, and it's in terms of temperature. So I'll talk about how much sugar per hour to have and how much fluid. So in terms of sugar, I think that's something that pretty much can be used for everyone, but water is a little bit different. So it's probably going to only be about 9 or 10 degrees potentially. So I'm here in the UK at the moment. So that means I'm not necessarily needing to worry about fluids too much. So I'll start with sugar per hour and then we'll get onto fluids. So in training, I always recommend at least 100 grams of sugar an hour, regardless if it's an hour or a 7, 8, 9 hour epic. Always at least 100 hours, regardless of how easy it is. And then the harder it is, the harder you're pushing yourself. I don't necessarily put a limit on how much sugar you should need. So for me, I will consume the harder my training is, for example. And I basically have what I have in training in a race, so that I'm used to it. But essentially, as the training gets harder per hour, I don't put a limit. So I find that I start to feel a bit sickly when I know I've had enough. For me, that's usually around 140, 150 grams an hour. But if you can stomach 200 grams an hour before your body tells you, so just the natural feedback rhythm, you start feeling, when you drink and you get that I don't want any more, then you know you've had enough sugar. So at least 100 grams an hour and you will never bonk, and partly you'll never cramp, and the other half is obviously fluids, and it's not salt. Okay, so I don't recommend putting salt in your bottles, because through personal experience, I've added salt to my bottles, and guess what? I've still cramped because I haven't drunk enough fluid and I haven't had enough sugar. And now that I always have enough sugar, at least 100 grams an hour, okay, that's the most important thing, at least 100 grams an hour, I don't bonk, I don't cramp, but I also don't bonk, okay? So for my race, I'm going to be looking to make sure that I'm, as I say, getting to that 140 to 150 grams per hour over the 3 hours, each hour for 3 hours. So for me, I'll probably be looking to have, so these are 550 ml and this is 750. So I'll probably put in a region of about 100 to 120 grams, probably about 120 grams of sugar. So this is sucrose. So this is 50-50 of glucose and fructose. And I'll be using this as my main source of fuel. So about 120 grams of sugar, and then fill it with water, no salt, just sugar and water. And I'll have probably 3 of them. So that's what, about 120 grams an hour, 120 grams an hour, 120 grams an hour. And each one of those bottles will probably last me about an hour at about 9 or 10 degrees. And the only products that I found that work best is these SIS beta fuel gels. So I'll have these as like a supplement on top, and these have per gel either depends how you read it, so 40 grams of carbohydrate or about 20 grams of sugar, because they make these of maltodextrin and fructose. So essentially they're trying to recreate table sugar, and they say it's a 1 to 0.8, as you can see there, 1 to 0.8 mixture of maltodextrin and fructose, which is essentially carbohydrate, glucose and fructose, essentially what they're doing. So I'll have that because they're just easy, and I find that quite a lot of other gels, they just have maltodextrin. They're just maltodextrin, and they don't have the best formula, which is glucose and fructose. That's what you want to look for. So I'll have that on top, and I essentially use these to make it up as sort of a stopgap. So I could make these up to 140, and I might do that on the day, but essentially because I'll need to feed during the race, if I start with 2 bottles and I need to feed with another one, if I miss or drop a bottle or a bottle drops off my bike, I use these as sort of a safety margin. So if I'm not able to get the sugar I need through the bottle, I'll start using these. Now as the temperature increases, so you get to more like 20 degrees, and you're needing to drink more than 1 bottle an hour, therefore I reduce the amount of sugar I have in the bottles, and I move more to stuff like this, the gels. So I find it's easier the stress is less when it's cooler, because you're not necessarily needing to feed quite as much, because you can just start with maybe 3 or 4 of these in a back pocket or on wherever you store them. So if you're doing triathlon, I know you can store stuff on the bike, but for road racing you're going to want to put it like on your pocket somewhere, and that's the fueling strategy that I look to do. And then so yeah, if it's below 10 degrees you can go, I would say I recommend probably up to about 14 or 15 degrees. You can get away with quite easily, I think, with a 550 bottle, so about 500 milliliters of water an hour. But then once you get to 20, you might want to look to have maybe a 750, or you're going to need to start feeding on your second bottle after about 45 minutes, and then so it gets more tricky. And then once you get above 20 to 25 degrees, I would say you're probably going to be wanting to have 2 bottles every hour. So about 25 degrees, probably 2 500ml bottles of water, so about 1 litre an hour. And then once you're over 30 degrees, I would say you're probably wanting to have at least 1.5 litres an hour if you're riding successive hours. So obviously you're needing to drink a lot of fluid, and as you're drinking more fluid, you'll have to decrease the amount of sugar, because otherwise if you're still having 140 or 120 grams of sugar in each bottle an hour, then you're going to be on like 300 grams or something an hour just from bottles. So that's when I start using stuff like these gels, and specifically these beta fuel ones, because I say that they they have that. I know there are other brands that like to recreate that sort of sugary ratio of fructose to glucose, but personally I've had experience with these, and I find that they taste quite nice, which is also something that's nice. They're not, for me, I don't find it's like overly sweet. They've managed to find quite a nice taste, and the texture's good, and they digest. I found what they digest well, but I wouldn't necessarily just fuel off gels, because I find that's when you start to get gastrointestinal problems during the race. So it's finding the balance, and I say I practice it in training, mainly fueling on sugar, just sugar, table sugar, and then start practicing with these and supplementing these during the race. And you can use this strategy, in maybe a long time trial, if you're doing these long 50, 100 mile time trials, for example, or even if you're out with your mates or friends doing a crazy 100-mile smashing yourself for 100 miles or some crazy thing, and on the weekend, you can fuel like this, and you won't bonk and you won't cramp, as long as you have at least 100 grams of sugar an hour on one end of the range. And the top end of the range, I don't recommend limiting it. I just recommend having enough until your body says naturally that you've had enough. So for me, that's 140 to 150 grams an hour of sugar. And for running, the same thing. I would say at least 100 grams of sugar an hour for running, and the harder your run gets, just the more sugar you'll need. And then I have other videos on nutrition for what to have before and after, and how to get lean in the first place, which is not through excessive exercise or calorie counting or starvation. It's from eating the right diet that I eat every day. So I'm 5'11" and about 64 kilos, and I like eating. I love eating, and I'm not fat, and I don't lose sleep over it either. So if you found this video helpful, then like and subscribe, and if I missed something that maybe you thought I overlooked and I need to make another video, or you want to ask, then ask in the comments and I'll maybe reply or do another video. I think I covered everything that I was thinking of. So yeah, and if it was 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, again, I would probably use the sugar as the staple, the main source, because I don't find that I ever have any problems in terms of gastrointestinal distress. As you've seen on the TV in some professional races, sometimes the riders have to get off their bikes and answer the call of nature in a ditch. I think that comes from more using stuff like this too much and not using the sugar. So I don't think you'll ever have any problems like that if you just have table sugar, which is sucrose. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for your time. Ciao.